Erica never thought much about living alone. She was a 21-year-old college junior, studying psychology and working part-time at a coffee shop. When she found a small, affordable apartment just a few blocks from campus, it felt like freedom. Her parents were supportive. Her friends envied her independence. And Erica herself enjoyed the idea of finally having her own space. The first few weeks went by without incident. She decorated the living room with thrift store finds, strung fairy lights along the windows, and turned the tiny bedroom into a cozy retreat with stacks of books on the nightstand. For the most part, life was ordinary. She went to class, studied late into the night, and sometimes had friends over for wine and Netflix marathons. But slowly, little things began to gnaw at her peace of mind. At first, it was small enough to ignore. A box of cereal that emptied quicker than she remembered eating. A tube of toothpaste squeezed from the wrong end. A faint smell of cigarette smoke lingering in the living room. When Erica didn't smoke at all, she told herself she was imagining it. Maybe she had eaten more than she thought. Maybe she had absent-mindedly squeezed the toothpaste differently. The smoke, she reasoned, must have drifted in from a neighbor through the vents. But the unease only grew stronger. One night she returned from a late shift at the coffee shop and noticed the bathroom mirror was fogged up, as if someone had just taken a hot shower. The strange part, she hadn't been home all day, and her water bill showed a recent spike she couldn't explain. Erica called her mom that night, laughing it off nervously. "Maybe I'm losing it," she said. But her mom's voice was serious. "Change the locks, sweetie. Just in case." Erica promised she would, but she never got around to it. Money was tight, and besides, she didn't want to admit she was really scared. As the weeks went on, more things piled up. She'd come home to find her bedroom window cracked open, even though she always kept it shut. A pile of laundry she was sure she left folded was now unfolded across the bed. Once, she woke up to the sound of something clattering in the kitchen, only to find nothing when she investigated. Her friends teased her, calling her paranoid. And Erica laughed along, but deep down she felt a growing sense of dread. The breaking point came on a Thursday night. Erica had a long day of classes and crashed into bed early. Around 2 a.m., she woke with the uneasy sense that something was wrong. The air in the room felt heavy, as if charged with static. She sat up in bed and listened. For a long time, there was only silence. Then, from the direction of her closet, she heard it, the faintest rustling sound. She froze. The closet door was only a few feet from her bed, slightly ajar like always. Her eyes stayed locked on the sliver of darkness between the door and the frame. She thought she saw the faintest movement, a shift in the shadows, but she couldn't be sure. Her throat tightened, and she pulled the blankets to her chin, straining to listen. The sound stopped. The room was dead silent again. Erica told herself she was dreaming, that she had just woken up mid-nightmare. She eventually fell back asleep, though uneasily. And in the morning she convinced herself it had been nothing. But she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. That weekend, Erica decided to buy a cheap motion sensor camera online. It wasn't expensive, and she justified the purchase by telling herself it was for peace of mind. She set it up in her bedroom, aimed directly at the closet. For the next 2 nights, nothing happened. On the third night, everything changed. Erica woke the following morning to find a notification on her phone. Motion detected, 3:17 a.m. Her stomach dropped. She tapped the video file and watched with mounting horror. At first, the footage showed her sleeping, curled up on her side, the glow of the fairy lights faintly illuminating the room. Then, slowly, the closet door creaked open. A hand, pale, with dirty fingernails, slid out from the darkness, gripping the doorframe. A man emerged, crouched low, his hair greasy and unkempt, his eyes glinting as he looked directly at Erica's sleeping form. Erica's hand flew to her mouth as she watched. The man stepped silently into the room, moving with terrifying familiarity. He stood at the foot of her bed for several minutes, just staring at her. Then he walked around the room, opening drawers, inspecting her belongings, even leaning down close to her face as she slept. Finally, he slipped back into the closet, closing the door behind him. Erica dropped the phone, her body shaking. She wanted to scream, but no sound came out. That video confirmed her worst fear: someone had been living in her apartment. Someone had been watching her while she slept. She bolted out of the apartment with nothing but her phone and keys. Calling the police from the safety of her car. Officers arrived within minutes. Erica waited outside, trembling, as they searched the apartment. When they opened the closet, they found a small crawlspace hidden behind the back wall. Inside were blankets, food wrappers, cigarette butts, and even a set of clothes. The men had been living there for weeks, maybe months. Surviving off Erica's groceries and sneaking out at night. Worse, they found a collection of Polaroid photos tucked into a shoebox. Every single one was of Erica, sleeping, cooking, studying, sitting at her desk. Some were taken just feet away from her. Others from angles she didn't even realize someone could see. The police eventually caught the man a few days later. He was a transient who had broken into the building and discovered the crawlspace. He admitted to living in multiple apartments before, slipping in unnoticed and surviving off whatever he could find. Erica never returned to that apartment. She stayed with her parents until she could find a new place. And even then, she never slept soundly again. The thought of those Polaroids, of waking up with a stranger standing inches from her bed, haunted her for years. And sometimes, when she's lying awake at night, she swears she can still feel eyes on her, watching from the dark. Hannah had always thought of herself as someone who was careful. Maybe even too careful at times. She was the type of person who double-checked her locks before bed. The type who left a light on in the hallway just in case she had to get up at night. When she moved into her new apartment, she felt a mixture of excitement and nerves. It was her first place completely on her own. No roommates, no parents, just her. Her furniture, and the quiet creaks of a building that had probably seen better days. The apartment was on the top floor of a 3-story complex. That was one of the selling points for her. No one above stomping around late at night. No heavy footsteps echoing on the ceiling. It felt private, almost cozy. Despite the slightly aged paint. And the narrow staircase that led up to her front door. The first few weeks were peaceful. Hannah unpacked her things, decorated the living room with thrifted finds, and started to fall into a comfortable rhythm. She worked long hours at her new job downtown, so most nights she came home exhausted. She cooked quick meals, showered, and fell into bed with her phone in hand, scrolling until sleep won over. But about a month in, she started to notice small things that didn't add up. At first, it was just the occasional misplaced item. A mug she was sure she had left in the sink was now sitting on the counter. A blanket she swore was folded on the couch was instead draped over the chair. She chalked it up to her own tiredness. Long workdays, late nights, maybe she was simply forgetting. Then came the sounds. Lying in bed one night, Hannah heard a faint creak from above her ceiling. It was so subtle at first that she thought it might just be the building settling. Old wood, old pipes, no big deal. But the next night, she heard it again. Not just once, but several times. A long, dragging sound, like something heavy being shifted. She froze in bed, her eyes wide in the dark, listening until her pulse slowed. "It's just the building," she whispered to herself, forcing a nervous laugh. But deep down, she wasn't convinced. A week later, something happened that ripped away every shred of doubt she'd been clinging to. She came home late one evening after grabbing dinner with a coworker. Setting her bag down on the kitchen counter, she noticed something on the floor near her bed as she passed by. At first, she thought it was a scrap of paper or mail she had dropped. But when she bent down, her heart sank into her stomach. It was a Polaroid photo. A photo of her sleeping. Her hair was splayed across the pillow, her blanket pulled halfway up. She was turned slightly on her side. Her face slack with the piece of sleep she hadn't even realized was being watched. The photo trembled in her hands as she stared at it. Her chest tightened, her throat closing with panic. Someone had been in her apartment. Someone had stood right by her bed. Camera in hand, while she was completely unaware. She tore through the apartment in a frenzy, yanking open closet doors, peering under the bed, checking behind the shower curtain. Nothing. The locks were still intact. The windows still latched. How had someone gotten inside? Her mind raced, replaying the sound she'd heard in the ceiling. Her eyes flicked upward, toward the faint outline of the attic door in the hallway ceiling. It was one of those square panels with a pull string, the kind that led to a narrow crawlspace under the roof. Her stomach dropped. With shaking hands, Hannah dragged a chair from the kitchen, placed it under the attic hatch, and stood on it. She reached up, tugged the string, and slowly pulled the panel down. The wooden ladder creaked as it extended. A musty smell wafted down, dust, insulation, and something else. Something stale. She hesitated, then grabbed her phone, switching on the flashlight. The narrow beam cut into the darkness above. For a moment, all she saw was insulation, wooden beams, and boxes. Then, as she swept the light to the corner, her breath caught in her throat. A sleeping bag. Next to it, a pile of food wrappers, empty water bottles, and crumpled clothing. And photographs. Dozens of them, scattered in messy piles. Some were Polaroids, others printed on regular paper. Every single one was of her. Some were of her cooking in the kitchen. Some of her sitting on the couch, scrolling on her phone. The most chilling ones were of her sleeping, taken from angles that suggested the photographer had been standing just inches away. Her hands shook so violently she almost dropped her phone. She climbed down from the chair, slammed the attic door shut, and stumbled backward until her back hit the wall. Someone had been living above her, watching her, photographing her. Her first instinct was to run, to get out of the apartment immediately. She bolted for the front door, yanking it open and racing down the narrow staircase until she was standing on the sidewalk, gasping for breath in the cool night air. Her shaking fingers dialed 911. She could barely get the words out, stammering through her panic as she told the dispatcher what she had found. Within minutes, 2 officers arrived. She led them back up the stairs, through her apartment, and to the attic hatch. When they climbed up, flashlights sweeping the space, Hannah stood frozen below, hugging her arms tightly to her chest. She heard one of the officers mutter a low curse. Then, the sound of objects being moved around, the rustling of paper. "Ma'am," one of them called down, his voice grim. "You need to come see this." Her knees felt weak as she climbed the ladder, the beam of a flashlight guiding her. What she saw made her blood run cold. It wasn't just the photographs and food. There was a small notebook, its pages filled with cramped, messy handwriting. Her name appeared over and over, alongside disturbing notes. "Watched her cook dinner today. She hums when she stirs the pot. She leaves the TV on when she goes to bed. Easy to hear when she's asleep. She looks so peaceful when she's lying there. Like she's waiting for me to be beside her." Her stomach churned, bile rising in her throat. She flipped through the pages, each one more disturbing than the last. Whoever this was, they hadn't just been living above her, they had been studying her, cataloging her life like she was some kind of project. The officers quickly gathered the evidence, bagging the notebook and photographs. But the intruder himself was nowhere to be found. They suspected he had been tipped off by the sound of Hannah discovering the attic. He could have slipped out before the police arrived, vanishing into the night. For weeks after, Hannah couldn't sleep. Every creak of the building sent her heart racing. Every shadow seemed to conceal someone watching her. She moved out within the month, breaking her lease and crashing with a friend until she found a new place. Even then, the feeling never fully left her. The knowledge that, for weeks, she hadn't been living alone, that someone had been just feet above her head, climbing down into her apartment, watching her as she slept. It was something that burrowed into her mind and refused to let go. Even now, years later, Hannah keeps multiple locks on her doors, installs cameras in every corner, and avoids top-floor apartments with attics. Because the thought that someone might be up there, waiting in the dark, is a fear she knows will never completely go away. Mark and Julie thought they had finally found their dream home. It wasn't anything fancy, just a modest two-story house on the edge of town, but to them, it was perfect. After years of saving, countless viewings, and endless paperwork, they were finally homeowners. Their 5-year-old daughter, Emily, seemed just as excited as they were. She loved running through the empty rooms, her footsteps echoing off the bare walls as she declared which room was going to be hers. The house had charm, but also quirks. It was old, with creaky wooden floors and an attic that hadn't been touched in years. When they toured it, the real estate agent admitted the attic hadn't been used in decades. Just insulation and dust up there, she had said with a dismissive smile. Mark and Julie didn't think much of it. Most older homes had unused spaces, and the attic seemed harmless enough. For the first couple of weeks, life was normal. They settled into their routines, Julie commuting to work, Mark handling things around the house, Emily adjusting to her new school. They laughed about the quirks of the old place, the pipes rattling, the wind whistling through the windows, the occasional creak when the house seemed to sigh. But soon, they began to notice things that were harder to laugh off. It started with noises. At night, after Emily was tucked in and the house grew quiet, they sometimes heard faint sounds from above. A thump, a dragging noise, sometimes even what sounded like footsteps crossing the ceiling. Mark brushed it off as the house settling or animals nesting in the roof. Then Emily began saying things. One morning over breakfast, she looked up from her cereal and said casually, "The man upstairs was walking last night." Mark froze mid-sip of his coffee. "What man, sweetie?" Emily shrugged. "The man upstairs. He walks around when it's dark." Julie gave her a gentle smile, brushing it off. "You must have had a dream, honey." But Emily insisted. Over the next few days, she mentioned the man upstairs again and again. Always so matter-of-fact, as if she were simply reporting something obvious. "He looks down from the ceiling vent," she said once. Another time, she whispered, "He likes to watch us when we're sleeping." Julie tried to reassure herself it was just her daughter's imagination. Kids made things up all the time. But the unease began to gnaw at her, especially since the sounds in the attic hadn't stopped. One night, Julie woke to the sound of footsteps overhead. Distinct, steady footsteps. She shook Mark awake, her voice trembling. "Do you hear that?" Mark listened, his face hardening. He heard it too. Someone was definitely up there. Grabbing a flashlight, Mark climbed the narrow ladder to the attic. Julie standing below holding her breath. The beam of light cut across the dusty space, illuminating old insulation and cobwebs. But nothing else. No raccoons, no intruder, just emptiness. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling. A few days later, things escalated. Julie came home from work to find the living room window cracked open, even though she was certain she had locked it that morning. Another time, she found food missing from the pantry. She thought she was imagining things, until she found an empty wrapper stuffed behind the couch cushion. And then came the drawings. Emily loved to draw, filling page after page with crayon pictures. One evening, she proudly showed Julie a picture she had made. It was of their house, carefully outlined in black crayon. In one of the upstairs windows, she had drawn a figure, a tall man with wide eyes and long arms. "That's Daddy?" Julie asked, her voice unsteady. Emily shook her head. "No. That's the man upstairs." Julie's stomach turned cold. The final straw came one night when Mark was putting Emily to bed. She asked if he could close the vent on her ceiling. "Why?" he asked gently. Her eyes filled with tears. "Because the man upstairs is watching me through it." Mark and Julie shared a panicked glance. This was no longer something they could dismiss. That night, after Emily was asleep, Mark decided he was going back into the attic, but this time, he wasn't just going to shine a flashlight. He was going to search every corner. Armed with a flashlight and a baseball bat, he climbed up, his heart pounding. At first, everything looked the same: dust, insulation, cobwebs. But then he noticed something odd in the far corner. The insulation looked disturbed, like it had been shifted aside. When he moved closer, he realized there was a small opening in the floorboards, large enough for a person to squeeze through. His pulse quickened as he crouched down and shone his light inside. What he saw made his blood run cold. There was a narrow crawlspace beneath the attic, hidden between the walls. And in that crawlspace was a makeshift bed, blankets, pillows, food wrappers, and empty water bottles. Even worse, there were notebooks scattered around, filled with drawings. Drawings of them. Mark flipped one open with trembling hands. Inside were sketches of Julie cooking in the kitchen, of Emily playing with her toys, of the three of them sitting together on the couch. Each drawing was disturbingly detailed, as if the artist had been right there in the room, watching. His stomach lurched as he turned to another page, a drawing of himself asleep in bed. Julie beside him, Emily curled up in her room. The realization hit him like a punch: someone had been living in their house, watching them, creeping down from the attic while they slept. Mark scrambled back, his chest heaving. He nearly dropped the flashlight as he rushed down the ladder, slamming the attic hatch shut. He called the police immediately. When officers arrived, they searched the attic and crawlspace thoroughly. They collected the notebooks, the bedding, the wrappers. But the intruder himself was gone. It seemed whoever had been hiding in their attic had slipped away sometime before they discovered the evidence. The police told them it wasn't unheard of. Sometimes squatters found their way into old houses, living secretly in attics or crawlspaces. But the sheer level of obsession, evident in the notebooks and drawings, was beyond disturbing. Mark and Julie packed bags that very night and stayed in a hotel. Within a week, they put the house on the market. They couldn't bring themselves to stay there any longer. The thought that, for who knew how long, someone had been silently watching their every move from above, it was unbearable. Emily never mentioned the men upstairs again. But Julie would never forget the way her daughter had said it so casually, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Sometimes, late at night, Julie still wakes in a cold sweat, convinced she hears footsteps above her. She knows it's just her imagination, but the memory lingers, etched into her mind forever: the men upstairs, watching, waiting.